Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us this evening for this webinar. You're in the right place if you're here for the Inside the Mayor's Parlour at Dover's Historic Maison Dieu webinar. Welcome. My name's Vicky and I'm the Engagement Manager at the Landmark Trust. And this evening we've got an excellent series of speakers for you. I'll quickly run through and introduce them and do some housekeeping. So we've got Martin Crowther, who's the Engagement Officer at Dover's Maison Dieu. Martin works with a wide range of people, from schools and families to local community groups, to get them inspired by this incredible building. So this evening, Martin will give us a brief introduction to the Maison Dieu and its history, including a few stories from the Mayor's Parlour particularly. We've also got the Director of Art Conservation, Thomas Organ, who spent the last 40 years conserving and restoring wall paintings, both in this country and abroad. He and his team have spent the last 6 months carefully revealing, conserving, documenting, and recreating the stenciled scheme by William Burgess at the Maison Dieu. We've also got Alistair Dick Cleland, who's the Project Development Manager with me at the Landmark Trust. He deals with all the buildings that are suggested to the Landmark Trust as potential future projects. And he's going to be explaining how Landmark came to be involved in the Maison Dieu project, and also what the accommodation will look like when we open that landmark as a holiday let. There is going to be an opportunity for you to ask any questions that you might have at the end of the talk. So if anything occurs to you during the talk, please do submit those via the Q&A button, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A. Just click on that and you can type your questions, and I'll go through those at the end and put them towards our panel. And you may also notice that we're using auto captioning for this talk. It's not always the most reliable, but it's better than nothing, we found. So it is possible to turn them on or off or enlarge the font by clicking on the transcript, or it might have a little logo that's got a CC inside it. That button should also be at the bottom of your screen. So enough from me. Without further ado, let's get started. So I'll hand you over first to Martin. Martin, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vicky. I'll share my screen. Hope everyone can see that okay.
Yep.
Yeah, lovely. Yes, I'm Martin Crowther. I'm the Engagement Officer at the Maison Dieu in Dover, and that's how we pronounce it in Dover, actually. So that's what we go with. And of course, it means the House of God. But it also means it's also called Dover Town Hall. That's the other name that a lot of people know it as, and it's an incredible building. I must start by saying that we've got a project, a lottery-funded project called Reawakening the Maison Dieu, £10.5 million to transform, interpret, and make accessible this incredible heritage building in the heart of Dover. It's a building that's been occupied for over 800 years and has had numerous fascinating uses. In turn, it's been a medieval pilgrim hospital, a victualling yard for the Royal Navy, a Victorian town hall and prison, and most recently, a very popular events venue. And among those who've left their mark is Victorian neo-Gothic art architect and designer William Burgess, who worked at the Maison Dieu twice and was responsible for designing a major extension to the building, including the impressive Connaught Hall Assembly Room and the Mayor's Parlour, which opened sadly after his death. He died in 1881, having done all the plans, and it was taken through by his work team and opened in 1883. And his impressive decorative scheme, discovered under layers of modern paint, is being reinstated. And the building, of course, needs a huge amount of work. It had fallen on hard times and had got a little bit worn around the edges, but we've got this really impressive project to reopen it. It's well underway, and it will reopen next year, fit for the 21st century, after a major refurbishment and conservation programme, and as an accessible venue for an impressive range of events and activities, from weddings, drama and music events to conferences, dinners, and a very popular annual beer festival. And very importantly, as a major new heritage attraction for Dover. It's also a much loved community building. Some people refer to it as Dover's Village Hall. And we've had an ambitious activity programme involving local audiences and community partners, which has involved thousands of local people in exploring and celebrating its history, from community archaeology and a Dover at Night festival to a youth photography project to document its transformation. And a key element of the project is bringing new uses and income streams to the building, including, very excitingly, the Landmark Trust holiday let and the cafe bar. And we're delighted to be working with both the Landmark Trust and Arte Conservation as part of this impressive project. We're just trying to move on to the next slide, sorry. There we are, yeah. So this is the facade of the building. This is on the High Street side. You can see it's an incredible Gothic structure. On the right-hand side of the screen, we've actually got the medieval part of the building. That's a medieval tower dating from the 1300s. And just next to it, in the middle, with the Gothic window, is one end of the stone hall, which dates to the 1290s. And everything on the left-hand side, sorry, from the structure with the wonderful bracket clock onwards is the Victorian addition by William Burgess, the one that opened in 1883, including that lovely little sort of medieval tower you can see just poking out. And I'm going to show you some photographs just to show you and to celebrate how lovely this building is. This is from high up on the scaffolding as part of some rooftop tours that we've been able to do during the conservation process. You can probably see some beautifully just finished some cement work using traditional lime mortar. The conservation of the stonework is another part of the building's restoration. And we're very close to Dover Castle, which is an absolutely fabulous place to visit while you're staying in the landmark property. It's one of English Heritage's top attractions. We've also got some incredible, I like to refer to them as ornamental gargoyles. You could call them grotesques. Again, designed by Burgess, these line the parapet guarding the building from any ne'er-do-wells and looking very friendly on the whole and protecting it. And here we are right up, I know Tom will probably be talking about this later, but this is right up at the top of the bird's nest scaffold in the Connaught Hall, as well as the Gothic design of the building, the decorative scheme. We also have furniture and some incredible fittings. This is a fabulous Gothic sort of castellated gasolier early light fitting with all those beautiful turrets, and the scaffolding has given us the opportunity to get really close. This is a late 18th century painting of Dover, and it shows the Maison Dieu. If you look sort of in the over towards the left, just below Dover Castle, you can see the medieval tower, and to the left of that, the stone hall, and then some buildings just to the left of that, which was part of the original medieval pilgrim hospital. We think first built in round about 1200. This is the Maison Dieu just over 100 years ago in Edwardian times. Doesn't look too dissimilar today, apart from the transport does. So Dover very proudly was only the second town in the country to have an electrified tramways system. And very excitingly, just alongside what is part of the soon-to-be Landmark Trust holiday let, we discovered what had been the Dover Tramways office, complete with counter and some unused 1930s tram tickets. Here we have a very important figure in a Victorian stained glass window. This is Hubert de Burgh, who was the founder of the Maison Dieu, a very important person in the reign of King John. He was the Constable of Dover Castle, the Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports, the Earl of Kent, and probably most importantly, Justiciar, which is roughly the equivalent to Prime Minister today. He was a great survivor. He was successful in defending Dover Castle from the French in 1216, and the following year at the Battle of Sandwich, he defeated the French at sea. So a really important character, and the Maison Dieu was built as a hospital, a place of hospitality for poor pilgrims, most of whom were arriving from the continent on their way to the shrine of Thomas Becket at Canterbury Cathedral. Here we can see some pilgrims en route. The window on the left-hand side is one of the beautiful miracle windows at Canterbury Cathedral. And on the right-hand side, it's a modern copy, but it's of a tile that was discovered in, I think, 1215 at Canterbury Cathedral beneath the cloisters. They were looking to put in a step lift, lifted the first York stone flag, and immediately beneath it was a complete medieval tiled floor, including this crouching pilgrim. We do have some fabulous documents from that very early part of the Maison Dieu's history. This is a charter of the Maison Dieu. It was also known as the Hospital of St. Mary. So what you can see on that beautiful beeswax seal is St. Mary, the Mother of Christ, holding the infant Christ, flanked by saints, and at the bottom, sadly, I think reasonably badly damaged on this particular example, but there's the kneeling master of the Maison Dieu. And we've discovered a huge amount about this period of the building through archaeology. Part of the activity programme, we had 3 archaeological digs. In the first one, we moved 15 tons of earth by hand. And on the final day of the dig, as well as discovering some fabulous pieces of medieval window tracery, we discovered over 60 fragments of original, very early medieval painted glass. And this is of a kind known as grisé, and it's almost certainly original glass from the stone hall from the 1290s. And here we are investigating within the building. For landmarkers, this is going to be part of the storerooms for your building, but it's where Burgess and others have built in some of the medieval remains into later walls. And this intriguing structure always fascinated us. We couldn't quite work out what it was. When we dug a pit, it went down another 4 feet to sort of medieval levels. And then when some loose plaster was taken away for repair, we discovered, you can see it on the left-hand side of this image, but you can also see the remains of another arch, and there's a third one just to the right of picture. So it's actually part of an arcade, possibly part of an undercroft of the medieval pilgrim hospital that we didn't know about before. After the Reformation, it became a victualling yard for the Royal Navy. It was making the rock-hard salty ship's biscuit, salted pork and beef for the Royal Navy, and brewing beer. And this continued from before the Spanish Armada until after the Battle of Trafalgar. Finally ceasing operation in the 1820s, when it became Dover Town Hall and then was massively extended by Burgess and others. Here's some of the incredible spaces within the building. This is the beautiful stone hall. We actually had the Landmark Trust Patrons Dinner here a couple of years ago. Some of you might remember that. Hung with wonderful oil paintings, arms and armour from the Tower of London, and some incredibly rare and valuable regimental colours. The ones on the left-hand side date back to the Napoleonic Wars period. And all these items have been beautifully and painstakingly conserved. They're all crated up and ready to hang back on the walls when we reopen next year. You can see some of the lovely detailing, including the fabulous carved grotesques around the doors, which were created in around about 1860 when this room was restored. The first architect was a Dover Gothic architect, a very good one called Ambrose Poynter. But sadly, Dover Council took so long to get the money together that he had started to go blind. And so a young up-and-coming architect, William Burgess, was brought in to take over. But the windows were the work of Ambrose Poynter's son, who was only about 20 years old when he started work on the cartoons. He later went on to be a very successful artist and president of the Royal Academy. And on the left-hand side is one of the beautiful windows showing the siege of Dover Castle from the Stone Hall. And on the right-hand side, for a bit of fun, yesterday, the last windows in the Connaught Hall were going back in place. They've been beautifully restored by East Hope Stained Glass of Folkestone. And I just couldn't resist that image of the stained glass window with the conservator's head sticking above the top. So, yeah, they're all back in, and we had a bit of fun doing it. There's also a Victorian prison underneath the building, and part of this is going to become part of the cafe bar. And we're expecting spooky tours and all sorts of other activities as part of the activity programme. Here's William Burgess, who played such an important part in the building. And I was lucky enough last week to go with some of our volunteers to the V&A, where we looked at some of his original notebooks and diaries and sketches. And this also brought to light some really interesting information about him, links with the Pugins and actually staying in Ramsgate while he was a boy. And we had a chance to look at some of his incredible designs. And if we look at some of these, at the beautiful dragons and the lions, we see these replicated in all sorts of places around the Maison Dieu. Here's one of the lions in the Stone Hall. And here we are, right up high on the roof. The roof has all been beautifully replaced and conserved using traditional lead work. We're actually on the Lady Well side of the building, and the Lady Well is named after an ancient spring, which is still there but underground, and is possibly the reason the building was built there in the first place and dedicated to Mary, the Mother of Christ. And as part of the activity programme, we've been doing all sorts of events across the town. This is a tiny medieval mortuary chapel that once belonged to the Maison Dieu, St Edmund's Chapel, just along the road. And this is a textile installation by textile artist Jenny Cresswell, and it's inspired by the spirit of the Lady Well Spring. We were mentioning the paintings, and quite a number of those tie in beautifully to the Mayor's Parlour, because they actually show various mayors of Dover. This one is a very long-serving mayor who served 13 times for Dover. It's Henry Crundle, and you can see how dirty they become. Look on the right-hand side, and you can see with a little bit of cleaning how those have really come to life, and that's the work of Rebecca Gregg, our paintings conservator. This is part of the same painting, but it shows the Dover Mace. It's a beautiful object that will go back on display in the building. It's carried in procession by the mace bearer ahead of the Mayor of Dover, and it's one of the finest examples in the country, dating back to the reign of Charles II, made out of silver gilt. And here we are in the Mayor's Parlour. This is one of the beautiful wyvern dragons. They're two-legged dragons with a serpent's tail, and I'm very much favoured by Burgess in all his designs. Here's another one in the Connaught Hall. And one of my favourite items in the Mayor's Parlour is this beautiful parrot. Burgess absolutely loved parrots and included them in many of his schemes, including at places like Cardiff Castle. And this is a really intriguing story. In the Mayor's Parlour, there are a series of empty niches. And when the Conservators took back all the layers of paint and plaster, they couldn't find any evidence that they'd been filled. But there is an article in the 1883 Builder magazine that talks about the virtues looking down on the mayor. And those might have been the civic virtues of prudence, of temperance, of justice, and of fortitude in female form, hopefully extolling the mayors of Dover to uphold the highest standards in local government. And we had a wonderful community project. There were over 1,500 local school children who were involved, who reimagined the missing virtues of the Mayor's Parlour as values for Dover today. And these were projected on the sides of buildings and inside historic sites across the town just about a month ago, and it was absolutely fabulous. When we think of the Mayor's Parlour, we might like to think about some of the laws that the Mayor's brought in. And of course, in Dover, in Victorian times, it was a bit of a seaside resort. So I couldn't resist this one of the bylaws, which is talking about people bathing and making sure that you wear a dress proper to prevent indecent exposure, of course. And we came across this lovely little ticket to the coronation celebrations for King George V. And we're uncovering all sorts of hidden stories of the building. And one of them is a very strong link with suffrage, including a suffrage play that was performed just a few years before women got the vote. But it was actually called How Women Got the Vote. It was performed for only the second time in the country at the Maison Dieu. And if you want to know how women got the vote in this farce was by every single woman in the country going on strike for 3 days, and then the vote was duly delivered. And high in the attics of the Maison Dieu, we discovered a whole series of ballot boxes from local elections, late Victorian and almost certainly used for the first ever women's vote after the First World War. This was discovered beneath the floorboards of the Maison Dieu during conservation work, and it was a postcard sent to W.P. Jeffrey, who, with a bit of research, I worked out was the secretary to the Dover Choral Union, who performed many of their music events in the building. And I think they were meeting in the Mayor's Parlour as a meeting room, and this somehow accidentally probably slipped beneath the floorboards. But what's really interesting on the other side, it's from 1937. We've actually got the Graf Zeppelin, which was a sister ship of the infamous Hindenburg, the one that went up in flames in America in 1937. At the time, this was en route back from Rio. It got back to Frankfurt and then was immediately grounded. The envelope was deflated, but for 3 months, people could visit. And this is when the Dover family of Mr. Jeffreys, on holiday in Germany, went to see the gondola of the Zeppelin. Interestingly, the pilot of the Graf Zeppelin was an anti-Nazi. It only had the swastika on one side of the tail fin. So on purpose, he would fly around major events with the swastika facing outwards so that nobody could see it. And this is one of the programs of the Dover Choral Union. You can see all sorts of people taking part, including some quite well-known opera singers from the time. And yes, we have got a Song of Dover. And if you can't read it, I can just read you out the first verse. When Julius Caesar came from Rome and brought the Pharos over, he wished to land and make a home in our old town of Dover. And the Pharos, of course, is the tallest Roman building surviving in Britain today. It's one of the 2 lighthouses which are either side of the harbour of Dover in Roman times. And during conservation work in the Mayor's Parlour, we actually uncovered some wallpaper. Now, it wasn't that old. It was probably from the 1960s or 70s. Initially, we thought it might be William Morris, but it is actually an Augustus Pugin design. And I think ours, sadly, was the slightly dirty, grubby, brown-coloured one. The one I much prefer is the one on the left, but there we are. And yeah, some very famous visitors. Winston Churchill, who came as Lord Warden of the Cinque Ports. He came to the Maison Dieu on at least 2 occasions. He gave a very famous speech from the stage in the Connaught Hall, which you can still see on Pathé newsreel in 1946, thanking the people of fighting Dover for all their support during the war. And of course, he smoked a cigar. He left the stub and somebody picked it up. And I'm sure he probably spent a bit of time in the Mayor's Parlour. One other really interesting story is that the Kent Coal Mine Board met in Dover as well in the Mayor's Parlour. And this is a really nice engraving of Kent coal miners at work in the 1930s, I think. And the Queen Mother has visited too. So this is a beautiful portrait of her that we have. When you're in the Landmark Trust holiday let, in the kitchen diner, you might want to think about the fact that when the Queen Mother visited, they couldn't, they had to have a separate toilet for her. So one was very quickly fitted in that room, together with a really poor taste avocado sink, and quite a basic mirror, but set at exactly the right height. And the Queen Mother was quite small, quite petite, so it was quite low down. And here she is in the stone hall at the Maison Dieu. Just to say, that's the end of the presentation, but just to say that we've got all sorts of tours planned for the building, including of the Mayor's Parlour space, and we're very much looking to involve all sorts of different people, including some young guides. So these splendid chaps dressed as William Burgess are local students from Dover Technical College. Thank you very much. And if I can now pass over to Tom from Arte Conservation, who will talk about the reinstatement of the William Burgess decorative scheme. Thank you.
Well, good evening. I'm Tom Morgan of Arte Conservation. I hope everyone can hear me out there. I'm just going to load up my screen and see if I can share it with you. So give me 2 seconds. So there we are. The Mayor's Parlour in Dover, destined to be part of the Landmark Trust collection of properties that they rent out. We got involved some years ago. I mean, personally, on myself, I was in the Mayor's Parlour back in the 80s. And what I want to show you now is just how it all started, really, as far as I was concerned anyway. And that was that during decoration work being carried out at that time, peeling wallpaper was removed and areas of the Burgess scheme started to appear on the walls of the Mayor's Parlour itself. The building at that time included a panel in the ceiling, which had also been covered over, which you can just about see here, and the little niches that Martin was just talking about, which held the 7 virtues. They can just be made out here high up on the wall. 4 of the niches are visible, and there's one on the left-hand side where you can see the niche itself has been infilled with lath and plaster and then covered over. So there definitely was a recess in those areas. The scheme that you see in this photograph is actually a sort of reproduction of the original. So the walls, as they were decorated in the 1880s, were decorated a number of times with the same scheme repeated over quite a few decades. So there are various episodes of redecoration throughout the building. This just gives you an idea of the building of the Maison Dieu as William Burgess envisaged it. So you can see the Connaught Hall, the large building in the centre with its repeating arches and the sort of high vaulted structure. And although you can't make it out in any detail here, there's quite a lot of the what was to be the painted decoration is sort of indicated in the drawing. At the back of the building, you can see on the left-hand side the area that's occupied by the Mayor's Parlour itself, which is this sort of collection of living spaces and a sort of the mayor's parlour itself, which is the sort of more presentation room. The Connaught Hall itself was remodelled in the early 1900s when a large organ was installed at one end, and again at that point the scheme was completely repainted. As part of the research into the scheme as it had been, old photographs were looked at, and you can see here how the high vaulting was originally painted and possibly varnished. And on the walls themselves are these patterns of imitation stonework, so an ashlar design painted in red on a stone-coloured background. And there's a sort of frieze of wyverns going across at the level of the capitals. And the wyvern was a favourite design used by Burgess and appears in many places. So these photographs show the Connaught Hall just before the war. So you have not around that time anyway, 1940s. Gives an indication of the decoration at that point. So it's the sort of at least the second phase of decoration on the walls after the organ was inserted. And then by the early 2020s, you can see it now. It's been overpainted after the war a number of times with a much more simple light scheme. As part of investigations into the hall itself, a number of episodes of sort of paint research were undertaken. Different areas were looked at, areas were uncovered, lots of paint analysis was carried out. And that just involves taking small samples of paint and then looking at the stratigraphy. By doing that, you can build up a picture of how a scheme might have developed over time, work out which are the original layers, which are the later applications, and their sequencing as well. So it helps to date the designs as you see them. These particular areas here are from the Connaught Hall ceiling, and you can see on the left-hand side this interesting foliate pattern with birds against a sort of scrolling design. And the background colour, the wooden boards which form the ceiling itself, are what makes the pattern. So the painting is of the background, and that leaves the wood exposed, and that gives you the form of the birds and the foliage. On the right-hand side, you see another area which is uncovered, which clearly had a pattern on it, but it was very difficult to actually work out what that pattern was. However, by using digital techniques, you can use a program now called ID Stretch, which was actually developed for identifying petroglyphs by an American rock art researcher in America. And he had this very simple system, basically, of shifting all the color values. So the red, green, and blue colors can be enhanced in different ways to pick up on things which you can't easily see with the naked eye. This is a particularly good example of it. One of the small uncovering tests didn't really show very much, but as soon as it was subjected to the enhancement, pushing the red value, you could see the missing decoration in the center. So as part of the restoration of the interior, it was decided that one area of the existing scheme would be conserved and cleaned, and that was in the centre of the mayor's parlour. There's this ornately patterned timber structure covered with gilded areas and ornate stenciling. The ceiling itself is constructed of timber boards and planks, which had shifted and moved over time. So there was a lot of cracking and a lot of loss. But after careful cleaning and infilling, the areas were retouched, and the ceiling's now been restored. And elsewhere in the room, you have areas of decoration that were uncovered as part of the process of looking at the original scheme and trying to understand it. And because these areas are going to be painted over, they're carefully sort of protected first with a layer of acid-free tissue, which is applied with a reversible conservation grade adhesive. So just a few images here, just showing the retouching. Tiny little losses in the surface were cleaned up and then basically in-painted. And it's just another image here on the right of a small gilded detail on one of the ceilings, which has been uncovered, but again was covered with tissue and is going to be repainted and redecorated. One of the rooms in the Mayor's Parlour complex has this rather nice little daisy pattern, and these areas were again hidden by wallpaper for many years. The wallpaper was stripped off, but there was quite a lot of plaster repair and losses and damage, so the entire area is going to be redecorated. Before doing that, of course, we carried out a lot of measuring, working out where the designs were going to go, taking tracings, and then trying to take those tracings from a one-to-one copy of what was on the wall to a digital version, which can then be used to create stencils. And here are some of the tests. So the central panel is the parrot that Martin was talking about earlier. Here it's represented as a flat panel just for us to do our test to see that the colours are right, but it'll be transferred to the rounded corbels like the originals. And again, we've sort of mocked up quite a few of the designs so that we're sure that we're getting an accurate representation of what we want to get there once we start to stencil again. And so you see one of the imitation niches on the left-hand side, which will be reconstructed. And one of the decorations above the fireplace in the Mayor's Parlour. This particular one is a floral design, which is stenciled. So that's applied and then sort of stippled through. But all the line work, all the ashlar is done by hand. So it's freehand line work using a lining brush. As part of the investigation work, every area of the building has had to be looked at in detail. So uncovering tests have been carried out in every single corner, every single nook, to ensure that we have a clear idea of what decoration goes where. And this just shows a breakdown of the ceiling. So each area that's been traced on site, uncovered, copied, digitized, turned into a stencil, and then a digital mock-up done here so that we can be sure that when the decoration is carried out, everything goes into place correctly. So another important part is the choice of colour. The original scheme was painted in oils onto lime plasters and a timber structure for the vaulting and the ceilings. We're not using oils anymore. We're going with modern colours. There's an agreement to well, there are lots of complicating factors when working with a new build. Although it's an old building, there's new decoration going on. And since Grenfell, there are all sorts of things that come in about fire ratings for paints, etc. So that's changed. Some of the choices that might have been available have been slightly different now. But what this does is this shows how we try to match the existing colours. It's always difficult to know how to assess a historic colour or an existing paint layer, because obviously it's been there for a while, it's aged, it might be damaged, there's all sorts of things that might affect the colour. But we've done a lot of tests throughout the building and come up with what we think is a relatively accurate palette with which to reconstruct the decoration. And what you see here is an example on the right-hand side where the colour is matched using a scanner which links to your phone. That gives you a reference. There's also a colour swatch that you can also use to double check that that is the right colour. So through a combination of the two, you can then give these NCS references to a manufacturer. In this case, it's Kime, who produce paints for historic buildings. The actual colours that are being used aren't going to be by Kime now, they're going to be by somebody else, but it just gives an example of how you can scan an object, match a colour, and then have a new paint produced by a number of manufacturers. So here's just an example of our colour palette. It shows all the different areas of colour. It's based on the colours that were found on site and then matched using both scanning and hand tinting, just to sort of ensure that we've got the right colour. And it gives a sort of list of the paints that will be used to reconstruct the interior. So going back to the basics of how to reproduce a scheme, you have to look at the original, trace it. From those tracings, sometimes there's not a lot of information there. The area you're trying to look at might be quite damaged. So drawings are made up just to sort of be sure that you have the right sort of design. The picture on the right-hand side shows where those sketches have been sort of turned into a stencil pattern. So obviously the finished design is a complete image, but when you stencil, you have to make bridges to allow you to sort of hold the design together. And this is just one of these sort of tests where you work out where the bridges should be put in the stencil when you want to create a stencil. And eventually you end up with lots of sample panels. What we can see here is pretty much all of the elements that will go into the mayor's parlour itself, starting to come together. And then finally, we start stenciling. So this is a process which is underway, but there's still a lot to do. We're only started on a couple of rooms. There's still a lot of preparatory work being carried out, but it gives you an idea of the sort of techniques which are needed. Stenciling itself, I should also say, is quite a dry process. You need a dry brush, and you build up the paint. You don't want a wet brush leaking behind the stencil and giving you sort of rough edges and bleeding through and all that sorts of things like that. So it's quite important to make sure that you have the paint correct when you do it. And then here's one of the examples from the Connaught Hall ceilings. So you get an idea. The blue background has been overpainted. We've got a sort of scheme of a light sort of pine wood background look with a dark red for the timber borders. And then you can see on the top right the stencil being stuck into place, so that's just taped into position. The top left shows the image after you've completed the stenciling, and then the bottom left shows it after you've retouched all the bridges, so you end up with a complete stencil. And that's pretty much it. This is how we think the interior is going to look at the end. Unfortunately, I can't show you a completed version of the mayor's parlour yet because we're only just getting that underway. But hopefully by the time the Landmark Trust take it over, it'll be a riot of colour. But eventually so will the Connaught Hall. And so finally, I think that really we are all looking forward to maybe having a party there at Christmas, as they did many, many years ago. Anyway, thank you very much. Goodbye. Oh, sorry, I just forgot. I must now pass over to Alistair Dick Cleland from the Landmark Trust.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Tom. That's absolutely fascinating and a quite daunting amount of work still to do. As you've heard from Martin and Tom, the whole Maison Dieu project is one of really astonishing scope and ambition. And we here at Landmark are thrilled that just a small part of this vast complex of the Maison Dieu is going to become a landmark. And I thought you might be interested to hear how this came about. So it was back in May 2016, I was contacted by Kate Pinnock of Ingham Pinnock Associates, who were back then, and I think still are, consultants to the Maison Dieu scheme. And knowing about the newly discovered Burgess decorative schemes in the Mayor's Parlour block, Kate was interested to see the Grange at Ramsgate, which is the house you can see here on your screen. The Grange, as many of you will know, was the home of Augustus Welby Northmore Pugin. And here he is on the Albert Memorial in London. The Grange was designed by and for him in 1843, without for once having to please an external client, or worse still, a committee. Imposing, as he said, no features which are not necessary for convenience, construction, or propriety. And as he said, the Grange has not an untrue bolt or joint from foundation to flagpole. So I hope he will permit a diversion to tell you a little bit about the Grange, as it's relevant to why the Mayor's Parlour is going to become a landmark. The Landmark Trust took on the Grange back in 1997, when it was really in a pretty sad and sorry state. This is the Pentis, which actually is a later addition added by his son, Edward, leading up to the front door. And this is the dining room, as you can see, with sort of shreds of wallpaper and previous decorative schemes. The house has had many alterations and additions over the years, not least as it was used as a Catholic boys' prep school. And by the time we had acquired it, the previous owners had been hoping to turn it into flats. So not a very good outcome for a Grade 1 listed building by one of the UK's very finest architects. So the restoration of the Grange is a talk in itself, but the important point is that as we looked at both into the documentary and physical evidence, the more it became apparent that we knew more about how the house had looked back in Augustus Pugin's time than at any later stage. So the decision was taken to restore the Grange, broadly speaking, back to how Pugin would have recognised it. And this, unusually for most landmarks, was to include a full-blown, recreated, Gothic, historic interior. So Landmark's furnishings manager sourced lots of Gothic furniture, including even some original Pugin doors, which were skillfully repurposed to make bedside cupboards, which you can see here either side of the beds in one of the bedrooms. The original Pugin dresser in the breakfast room, which had been illegally removed and was about to be sold at auction, was rescued in the nick of time and returned to the Grange. As it was a fixture rather than just a piece of freestanding furniture, it should have had listed building consent for its removal. Wonderful decorative chandeliers were sourced, of which this is one example, with the necessary smoke detectors cunningly hidden within them, which you might just be able to see right at the top of the chandelier. And perhaps best of all, we discovered first one and then several more colourways of Pugin's own personal and bespoke wallpaper, designed especially for the Grange. Here's a panel of wallpaper we found hidden behind some later bedroom panelling. This panelling had been added quite early in the Grange's history, so the wallpaper underneath had survived with all its original vibrancy. And the design includes his initials AP, his family crest of en avant, and the emblem of a martlet, a bird that never rests, and so is often depicted without feet. So we had these wallpapers, especially recreated as part of the restoration of the Grange. And here is the hall. The wallpapers were recreated by Cole & Son, and the result is a complete Gothic interior, this being Pugin's own bedroom, just as Pugin would have known it. This is the sitting room, complete with portraits of the great man and his third wife, Jane, either side of the fireplace. And if you don't believe that this is an accurate recreation of Pugin's interiors, this is a watercolour painted by him showing the view from the hallway into the sitting room that we've just seen. And as you can see, it really is exactly the same. And we even went to the trouble of having some new Pugin-esque rugs, specially woven. And I like the story that these rugs were unveiled in the Grange, when they were unveiled in the Grange for the first time. One of the AP monograms in the corner of a sitting room rug had been woven back to front, a complete disaster. But the maker's Ulster carpets duly dispatched a craftsman who sat down, unpicked the wool, and he restitched it just as it should have been. And it was here in the library of his own house that Pugin worked. He didn't have an office, dashing out endless Gothic designs for cathedrals, churches, country houses, and most importantly for the Palace of Westminster, all the time singing quietly to himself when he wasn't praying in the little chapel that he built at the Grange, seen here. Genius is an overused word, but in Pugin's case it definitely applies. His output was extraordinary, and by the time he was 40, he was burnt out, mad, and died. And poor old Burgess didn't do all that much better, as he died at the age of only 53. And like Pugin, he died here in his own house in Kensington, London. So it was to see an authentically recreated historic interior that was the reason for Kate Pinnock contacting me all those years ago. So we had a party of people from Dover and those connected with the Maison Dieu project over to visit the Grange. And as Kate explained what had been discovered of a decorative Burgess scheme in the mayor's parlour, you can probably imagine that it didn't take me long to raise the possibility that maybe the Maison Dieu project might consider a landmark holiday let in this section of the building. And I'm delighted to report that this idea was well received, and following our usual procedure of staff visits followed by trustee visits, it was of course eventually agreed that the 3 floors of the mayor's parlour block would indeed make an excellent landmark. And with the wonderful Burgess decorative schemes being recreated under the skillful care of Tom's team, it will surely have the same sort of magic as the Grange does, albeit perhaps not quite so colourful. As you will have already seen and heard this evening, work at the Maison Dieu is steaming on apace. So my job is to give you a little bit more detail about the actual landmark that hopefully you will one day be renting for your own private stay here. There are many reasons to holiday in Dover. There is its famous castle that Martin was telling us about. There's the Western Heights, which is a whole series of very impressive fortifications on the western side of the town. There's Dover Museum, with not least its Bronze Age boat, seen here, which is amazingly some 3,500 years old. And there's also the impressive remains of a Roman painted house, including some of the finest wall paintings discovered north of the Alps. So lots of reasons to come and stay here. To orientate ourselves, the Mayor's Parlour suite of rooms is in the northeast corner of the Maison Dieu complex. This is the front of the building, which we saw earlier, on the High Street. And as we come round the corner, this is the Ladywell elevation. We felt it was important that landmarkers, as we call our customers, should have their own front door to be able to come and go as they please. And the Ladywell elevation gives us exactly that. It's the door underneath the little balcony a couple of floors higher up. This elevation has now, this is the door here. And this elevation has now disappeared under a most enormous sheeted scaffold. The extensive ground floor plan is not going to provide any of the actual living accommodation for the landmark, as we have plenty of space on the floors above. So these areas will be for landmarkers recycling and rubbish, maybe bicycles too, for the all-important housekeeper storage. This is one of the ground floor rooms, for storage and linen, and a plant room for services. And it will also provide access to a small internal courtyard. This space, which includes a delightful Burgess quarter turret in the corner, you can just see in the middle upper section of this slide, has already been greatly improved by the removal as part of the current works of a large and unsightly kitchen extension. So this is looking the other end of the courtyard. The courtyard itself is currently still full of scaffolding, but it will be back to its original form. And although it's probably fair to say that being so far down, it won't be the sunniest spot in Dover, it will provide a cool and shady outdoor space and a welcome haven from excessive summer heat. So climbing the stairs, we reach the first floor, which is where things really start to get interesting. As can be seen from this floor plan, this level will provide the sitting room, dining room, and a kitchen breakfast room. The first room off the staircase will be the sitting room, seen here with the decorative scheme coming along very nicely. And this room will have a working fireplace with a stove fitted. And access via in-string parts such as this curved corridor link, the actual Mayor's Parlour is going to be the dining room for the landmark. which will be the only room to retain some of the original Burgess decoration on display in the ceiling, sensitively restored, as Tom has explained. The table and several of the chairs, originally designed for the room, are going to continue to live here. So landmarkers will be able to dine in some style around the huge circular table, which you can see from this slide here, is a very substantial construction indeed. And around this splendid table, you'll be sitting comfortably, I hope, in these rather splendid chairs, which have wonderful lions' heads at the end of the arms. Whether they was designed by Burgess is open to debate. John Evitts, who is Landmark Trust Furnishings Manager, has been consulting with various Burgess experts, and the latest thinking is that they probably aren't by him, sadly explained by the fact that he died in 1881, 2 years before the Mayor's Parlour was completed. But what is certain is that they're part of the original fit-out for the space, completed under the supervision of Burgess's long-time office manager, John Starling Chappell, and Richard Popperwell Pullen, who was Burgess's brother-in-law and who inherited his architectural practice on his death. They were made by the highly regarded East Kent furniture makers, Cobbe Brothers of Hythe, and they're made from American walnut and covered in Morocco goat skin and stuffed with horsehair. One quirk of the table is that it still includes a large fragment of shrapnel from a cross-channel World War II German shell that crashed through the floor of the fire station across the road. And there's the bit of shrapnel still embedded in the tabletop. It's perhaps worth saying that most surviving Burgess furniture is incredibly ornate and incredibly expensive. And here's just a couple of examples of some famous Burgess designs, the like of which won't be in the Mayor's Parlour block at Landmark, but it gives you a flavour of how ornate his furniture could be. The kitchen has been designed and has already been made by Landmark's own joinery team based at Honeybourne near Evesham for installation in a few months' time into this room, which is the one with the daisy decoration that Tom was showing us earlier. So there'll be another table and chairs here for breakfasts and less formal meals than in the Mayor's Parlour, which is the room next door. Between the sitting room and dining rooms was the Mayor's lavatory, complete with this rather handsome urinal seen here. This has been carefully taken out and put into storage, but the plan is to put it back, albeit not into working order. And the actual water closet below will be a functioning lavatory. So back to the staircase, we move up to the second floor. And here's the plan for that. And you'll see here that there are going to be 3 double or twin bedrooms. This is the first one, which is nearest the stairs. They're each going to have their own bathrooms, which is a degree of luxury unheard of in earlier Landmark days, but something we're getting quite good at providing in the newest landmarks. The largest of the 3 bedrooms, that's going to be one of the ensuite bathrooms. So the largest of the 3 bedrooms is this one, which was used by the Mayor's team of administrative clerks. And it still has these rows of picture rails that once held photographs, including those of stern-looking Victorian and Edwardian mayors. So there's still a mountain of work to do, both in the Mayor's Parlour and throughout the rest of the Maison Dieu complex. So although things are advancing very nicely, the main contract doesn't complete until the end of this year, December 2024. And so the Landmark will not open until spring 2025. But until then, do please sign up for the Landmark newsletters, which will keep you informed of progress and tell you in due course the all-important dates for the first bookings. When open, there'll be an opportunity to book a place on regular escorted tours of Maison Dieu, as Martin has explained, which will include the principal rooms of the Mayor's Parlour suite. And it will be open for major events, including such occasions of the Heritage Open Days in September each year. So to conclude, I hope you agree that the Mayor's Parlour will surely make a memorable place to stay for a Landmark holiday. And I do hope that what you've seen tonight will tempt you to try it. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you very much, all of you. Great. So this is your opportunity to ask any questions that you might have for any of our speakers today. I've seen a few come in as you guys have been talking, so I've got a few here ready to go. But if anybody does have any other questions, please do take this opportunity to type them into the Q&A box. You can find it at the bottom of your screen. But while you are all typing questions, I have got a few questions ready for some of you. So we'll start with this one that came in for Tom while you were talking. They said, what's the life expectancy for the decorations? I'm guessing that's for the ones that you're restoring now.
It's very difficult to say. Life expectancy for the decoration. I mean, it's all down to the building itself. If you keep the building in good condition, there's no reason why the paint won't stay there for a very long time.
Yeah, we hope for a very long time, right?
Yeah.
Amazing. And this is an interesting question for you as well, Tom, actually. Emma's asked, I'd be interested to know why spray paint isn't used for the stencils like Banksy does instead of a dry brush.
It's a very different thing to a Banksy. You get an accuracy of finish, which you don't get in the same way with a Banksy spray. And in fact, Banksy uses stencils in a particular way. When he applies them, he deliberately allows the spray paint to bleed underneath in places. And sometimes there's a way of applying it that you can see in his work, which is something that we're not after. We want that hard, crisp edge.
Yeah, we want that precision rather than the yeah, definitely. Someone's asked us, I'm not too sure who's best to talk about this one, possibly Martin. Could you please talk about the environmental or sustainability measures taken in the renovation?
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. Yeah, I'm on the activity side, so I'm probably not the best person on the project to answer that one, but I do know that there's a large number of measures that are in place to reduce our sort of carbon footprint, everything from low energy light bulbs, etc. So I can probably provide some more information, but I probably need to speak to some other people first. Thanks.
That's okay. Brilliant. Alistair, I think it must be Kate that's written saying, I still remember the day we met at the Grange well. It seems like a lifetime ago.
Yes, I mean that's what, 8 years ago already.
Yeah.
And best part of another year to go before we open, but it's going to be well worth the wait, I'm sure.
Exactly. And possibly Alistair, but maybe Martin, will we be keeping the piece of shrapnel in the table?
Absolutely, definitely, yes. It's a really important part of its history, and in fact, I'm going to research it a little bit more. I want to go over. I've been meaning to go to the fire station and talk to the people there, because they've got the scars in every single floor that it went through. So and I think I don't think it kind of exploded, because when those high explosive shells, the cross-channel ones, exploded, they took large chunks of buildings with them. In fact, blocks of buildings sometimes. So I need to find out a little bit more, and I might have to. We've got a big team of research volunteers, which is one of our activity strands, and that's definitely on my radar as something that we need to do, because I'm sure the landmarkers will be really interested in that story. Just out of interest, one of the, and I might just read it out actually. One of the people who was one of the mayors during the Second World War was somebody called Jimmy Cairns. And I've just got a little quote. I didn't think I had time to read this, but I will read it out now, because Dover was incredibly badly shelled and bombed during World War II, probably more than any other town in the country. and Jimmy Cairns, World War II mayor, carried on despite the bombing. I found a lovely little book in the museum collection, and it said that landlord Jimmy Cairns, bluff hearty Tynesider of the Primrose Tavern, serves you a pint of old and mild, and then off he goes to the town hall to serve you again as Mayor of Dover. Jimmy Cairns' motto is carry on. He said it again the other day when Dover's 1,500th alert was sounded during a council meeting. And when the Primrose was badly damaged, it wasn't long before Jimmy was back behind the bar, bowler-hatted and imperturbable, carrying on. And then this is very relevant. Lively council meetings are frequently rendered livelier by enemy action. Alerts no longer see them postponed. Raids do not disturb them. One day during the height of the Battle of Britain, hard-pressed German raiders dropped bombs, and above the roar of aero engines and the crash of anti-aircraft guns, their whistle was heard. I think bombs are dropping, murmured a councillor, but argument was too heated to pay him the slightest attention. So Dover got used to it, and people did go to the shelters, including in the basement of the Maison Dieu, but life carried on despite the bombing.
It's just that resilience, isn't it? It's amazing. Just a quick recap, Alistair, maybe you could just clarify. There's a couple of people are just questioning who Burgess was. And Hugh here has said, was Burgess a pupil of Pugin? So what's that relationship of, could you just recap that?
Yes, that's good question. I mean, he was a bit younger than Pugin, who died in 1853, I think I got that right. So he only got to enjoy the Grange for about 10 years. I mean, Pugin was just seminal to anybody who believed in the importance of Gothic design and Gothic architecture, which was considered the sort of true native style for the UK. There was a sort of reaction against classical design at that time, and so when the Palace of Westminster was destroyed in a fire, and a brief was drawn up to create a new Palace of Westminster, the brief specified that the design had to be in the Gothic style. The competition was actually won by a chap called Charles Barry, who was a classicist, and he didn't know how to do Gothic detailing, which is why he employed quite a young Pugin at the time then to do all the detailing for him. And I always think it's rather sad that Charles Barry got knighted for this great service to the nation, and poor old Pugin got largely forgotten. But his star has risen a lot, particularly in recent years, not least to do with the restoration of the Grange, which has been a great success. I don't know how much Burgess sort of followed Pugin, in great detail. I mean, Burgess used to holiday as a child in Ramsgate, so he knew the town quite well. He actually went there before the Grange was built, but he was only 10 at the time. So if he continued to holiday in Ramsgate, he may well have known the Grange. And I think Martin has done a bit of digging in these books, which has discovered that there was this sort of connection between Burgess and certainly Pugin's widow Jane and his son Edward, who was a important and very successful architect in his own right. So yeah, very
if I just add to that, Alistair, we went down to RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects study room, just last week with some of our university researchers who are working on the project, and we've just started looking in detail at these incredible little notebooks of Burgess. Really tiny, sort of spiderish writing. You need a magnifying glass just to read it. But in the front of them, he actually, and in his diary, he lists people he's met, important people during the year. And the problem was, I only got through one box of 3 of these. And I know that he's meeting with Pugin's widow, and he's meeting Mrs. Pugin, and he's meeting with his son, who, as Alistair said, became the architect. But I haven't a chance yet to get back and go through those earlier ones. But we've got a master's student who's on the case, Katie Williams from Canterbury Christ Church University. So and some others. So we'll let you know hopefully we'll establish those links. And we know that Burgess was in Kent very, very regularly. And in fact, if you go onto a fabulous website called Kent-Maps-Online, which is Country Christ Church University, you can read about Burgess's Kentish links on that website. So it's a series of visual essays. So I recommend people have a look at that. Thank you.
We've had a few questions for you, Tom. Someone's asked, how much has the restoration process changed with modern technology?
There's a question. In a way, not a lot. In that the basic techniques of finding a color scheme, putting a scheme together, measuring out the rooms, working out where the designs go, doing the designs, most of that is done by hand. The modern technology for us comes in possibly with things like the creation of the stencils themselves. So we're obviously dealing with a very large area, particularly with the Connaught Hall. So there's hundreds and hundreds of square meters of surface to cover, which means we have to make multiple copies of the stencils. And beforehand, you would have probably done that by hand, but now it's a case of making a digital version of your image, sending it off to a woman who has a small company in Whitstable, and she puts it into her laser cutter, and we end up with a stencil. So we just contact her, and multiple copies come back to us.
That's definitely a time saving.
Yeah, absolutely.
And someone's just asked, what happens to all the new stencils? Are they going to be saved? Do they get kept in an archive somewhere?
Archived. I think there's probably going to be an archive at the end of this, quite a big one, because
Yeah.
we've got a lot of material. So
Find somewhere to store it all.
yeah. Well, there's a museum here. So
I've just seen the time and we've only got about a minute left. So I just want, there's been a few questions about access and public access. So Martin, would you mind sort of clarifying a couple of things? Firstly, quite practically, how accessible will the property be via public transport? And also, will there be access to the building for wheelchair users?
Yeah, I should have mentioned that it's very accessible by public transport. Both there's bus routes go alongside. The main bus station in Dover is less than 5 minutes walk, as is the train station, Dover Priory, and the access of the building was one of the key things that we were looking to address as part of the scheme. So what you will have is a new ground floor entrance into the building, a really wide new entrance that will bring you into a beautiful open atrium with a welcome desk. You'll actually look up above the desk through 3 opened up arches and see right up into the beautiful colour scheme of the Connaught Hall, which Tom and his team from Archaeology are working on. So it's going to be a transformed building with a large accessible lift and you know, all the features you'd expect, the accessible features for a modern building, but obviously in an incredible historic one.
Yeah, fantastic. It's such an that's so good, isn't it, to have that access where we've been able to. Perfect. And then someone's just asked, will the public have access to the Mayor's Parlour? So I think I actually know the answer to this one. Yeah. Because yes, they will. As Alistair sort of mentioned there at the end, obviously anyone will be able to book it as a holiday let, so you can come and stay on holiday at the landmark. And we will also you will also be able to book tours with Martin and his team through the Maison Dieu. Each week there'll be access via guided tours to the main rooms of the Mayor's Parlour. And we will also take part in things like Heritage Open Days and Public Open Days wherever we can, and we'll be working with Martin and the Maison Dieu team and the Landmark Trust together to make sure that there's access when we can and where we can and as often as we can. So I think that's everything that we've got time for. There were a few other questions. So I think if you do have any questions that you wanted to follow up with, I'm sure that you would be able to contact the Maison Dieu team on social media, or if there's an email address, Martin, that you guys use, is there?
So probably best if people they can email me direct, which is martin.crowther@dover.gov.uk.
Yeah, I think if you go on the Maison Dieu website, there is a contact us
There is as
section,
well,
and you
yes,
can
that's
find
right.
it from there, just so
Yeah.
that you didn't have to write that down. But thank you very much to all of you for joining us. Really appreciate it. Please keep an eye on your inbox in a second, because you'll be shortly receiving an evaluation request. We really appreciate any feedback that you've got for us about the webinar tonight, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it. But that's all for now. Thank you very much. And we've recorded the session, so we'll hopefully be sending a link to you all next week when that's on live. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of our speakers. Really appreciate it. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.